get to the non-recruiting afterwards. We'll open up the floor. Jeremy Birmingham, the podcast.
Ryan, obviously, a lot of good news this morning already. Just as an opener, can you just kind of talk about this class and what it is meant to have so many high-level, top-tier kids who have been committed for so long without? I mean, it's been relatively drama-free despite what we're all waiting on right now.
Right. Yeah, I think it's got a chance to be, one of the best classes in the country, and it starts off with what you're talking about in terms of loyalty along the way. I think that a lot of guys have been loyal along the way on offense. It really starts with Tavian. On defense, with Devin, both of those guys have been leaders in the class, their family, the way that they've done it. It just goes on down the list. The fact that we have 8 guys from the state of Ohio is significant, but this is a new age of recruiting. There are things even up until today, this morning, yesterday that have been, offered to these guys and opportunities. And so, to your point, I think that these guys grew a certain level of camaraderie during this process, and they want to play together, which is really important. And when you sign, I think we're right around, north of 25 guys here, depending on the last couple guys shake out. That's almost 30% of your roster, which is a great number. We know the portal will be opening up and those type of things. There'll be some attrition. So each year it's going to be important to make sure that we have stability within the program and making sure we bring in the high school guys and have a recruiting class like we do right here. I mean, this is an excellent class. It's got a lot of needs addressed and some obviously high-end players.
Needs addressed, I think, is what recruiting is about in nearly every case. 3 offensive linemen signed today. Not the numbers that you would want in a traditional year, in a normal year. How do you address that? How much conversation are you having with Justin Fry, with Mark Antoni, about fixing that moving forward, because this is now a running problem?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the one area there that I feel like we got to make sure that we're, going to be, moving forward into the next, few weeks addressing. We have to do that. And, there's a lot that goes with it, but it's certainly an area I think, Javon is really, going to give us something to tackle. Carter's a swing guy. Jake's a local guy who, all 3 of those guys we feel great about. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure we have the numbers that we need, making sure we have the depth that we need. And so that's, I guess in today's day and age, it's a little bit different on how you put the roster together. It's not just about the high school guys and recruiting. You have to make sure that you have your numbers and you have your depth. So whether it's through, retention or, maybe a guy in the portal here or there, I mean, that's what it's going to come down to. So it's everybody's job as a position coach to make sure that they have what they need.
I could ask a lot of questions, but if the freshmen coming in, obviously you don't want to count on them being major contributors. I mean, if they're good enough, sure. But how much did Jeremiah Smith change the way that you maybe see a guy like Devin Sanchez and measure the ability to impact on the field starting January 4th?
I think it depends on the position and the individual, but what Jeremiah has done has been extraordinary. But I also think there are some guys in this class that can step in and play, and a big part of that is coming in at mid-year, having spring practice, having the summer, and then being able to go in August. So I think there's some guys here that can do that. I think a lot of it has to do with positions. Not that there's not one guy on here that isn't going to come in here looking to play as a freshman, especially the guys who are coming in at mid-year.
You talk about Tavian and the evaluation process. I know that you are now in a spot where you prefer to wait with quarterbacks until, if you could, until their senior years. But here's a guy that you took heading into his junior year, 2 years of high school football in Ohio, to sit back and watch and evaluate. What made you comfortable with that? Because it's so antithetical to what you've been doing. But what did you see on him that made you realize it was the right choice?
Well, first off, he's from Bellefontaine, Ohio, and that is important here. But he came in. I think he started coming in as an 8th grader, and then came in as a freshman, and then every year he was growing and growing to the point where he just continued to improve and continue to grow, and you just saw some traits in him that were unique. And we just felt like he separated himself from the class, and then from then on he was focused on recruiting the class. You could see the leadership skills in him. I think he's done a really good job of leading his own team And, being somebody that, it was very unique in Bell Fountain. He came down for almost every spring practice to get around the guys and to see what's going on in terms of, the meetings on the field, what it looks like. And then, when he went on to, some of the camps and Elite 11s, he really carried himself very, very well there, competed well. So, he knows what he's stepping into because he's around the facility as much as he is. It's an easy ride for him to get here. And, he's going to come in and look to compete right away. And, I think, he's excited to get here. I think he feels like it's been a long recruiting process now because it has been a while. And we're obviously very excited to build around him.
How do you manage expectations for an Ohio quarterback? The last one to sign out of high school was Joe Burrow at Ohio State, so it's been a decade. How do you manage that for him, for his family, for what your expectations are?
We've talked about it as as a group with his family, what comes with that. We do have some experience with that, so it's not going to be normal for him, in his town of Bell Fountain. That's one thing when he comes here to Columbus that'll be new. But that's really the case for a lot of these guys. But like you said, being the quarterback in the state of Ohio is different. So we'll have a plan for that and explain exactly what's going on and what the expectations are, and showing him what it's supposed to look like. But for him to be down here as much as he is, I think he's getting a feel for that already.
Go to Mick Walker, Letterman Row.
Ryan, you always talk about evaluating coaches based on recruiting. What have you thought about the 3 first-year coaches you brought in with Matt and James and Locke all signing 2 to 3 guys and the talent they brought in there?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with our linebacking core. Eli obviously is from Ohio, and Riley, and we're waiting on possibly one more here to sign later this afternoon. And I think James has done an excellent job. First off, of building relationships. He's done a good job of evaluating. He brings credibility because he played the position at a high level here and then obviously in the NFL. So that's been great. I think making the decision to make him a full-time coach, you can see quickly, what's going on here in recruiting. I think Locke does an excellent job as well. He's bringing in some really good guys. Obviously, Bo Jackson here from Ohio is going to be a big one for us. Isaiah West comes in. And again, there's I want to make sure I can speak about him. This one right here, am I good? I don't want to get myself in trouble. Am I good there?
You are good there, yes.
Yeah, okay, good, yeah. So Turbo as well. Those are 3, upgrades there at running back and also building some depth. So, Locke is very, very aggressive, and so he really wanted to build depth in that room. And so, we'll continue to see how that shakes out with the guys that are here now, but he's done great. Matt also, when you see his evaluation, Fahim and Deshaun, Cody, I'm sure I'm not missing anybody. All 3 of those guys are excellent. Obviously Cody's from Ohio and comes from a great program, great family. He's going to be, a huge addition to our team. And then Deshaun really had a great year, suffered an injury late, but has a huge upside. And then Fahim is one of the top safeties in the country. So I think all 3 of those guys in year 1 have done an excellent job upgrading their room.
Summer camps have kind of gone by the wayside for a lot of schools, but you guys still have them, and 3 different signees today earned offers last summer. Multiple other guys earned offers, Tavian being one of them too. What benefits do they have for you guys, and what is it like to be able to see seniors or incoming seniors come down and earn a scholarship like Brody or Jake or Bottoman?
Yeah, you get to see them live and in color, but also shows that they're willing to compete. I think there's a lot of guys out there that, they feel like they deserve offers based on their film, which is great. But when you see guys come in, Aaron Scott did that. I can, name a bunch of guys who came in and was like, wanted to earn their scholarship or had already earned a scholarship, come down and continue to work. Nate Roberts did that in camp and was excellent. So I think those kind of guys, not only do they want to be here, but they're not, scared of competition. And the coaches get a chance to see their skill set, right in front of them with their own eyes. So those are all big. And, when you get a guy in camp and you evaluated him live and you get to see how they work and you put them in tough situations, you rarely miss on guys like that because you know exactly what you're getting.
You mentioned Nate, and obviously you signed Brody as well. What do you like about the 2 tight ends being able to finally sign 2 full-blown tight ends in a class?
Yeah, I think Keenan's really works hard at it, build a great relationship with Nate. Everybody in the country was after Nate from the jump and all the way until this last week. But he wanted to be a Buckeye through and through. His family is excited. He's from Norman, Oklahoma, so he's right in the teeth of it. And I thought there was a great relationship built there. Brody is very, very talented, can do a lot of things, great skill set, has a really big upside, we feel like. So, again, another upgrade there in the tight end room, which we know is a huge part of our offense. And so we need those kind of guys to come in and make an impact early on, which I think, coming in mid-year, both of them have an opportunity to do that.
You mentioned Turbo. Zion's another guy, I believe. I think he's in. Zion's another guy from Alabama. What do you guys see in Alabama this year to be able to go down and kind of get some guys? Obviously, there's one pending as well that could be out there.
Right. Locke has ties down there, which certainly helped. And, Caleb being down there, there's, some guys in there. We built, relationships early on in the recruiting process, worked really hard down there. And, I think, we're hustling, we're working down there, and there's really good football in Alabama, and these are really good players. So, I think, having Quinshawn come up here as well. I mean, you're seeing more and more guys, from that area, considering Ohio State.
One other position group you kind of took an excess in was the defensive line class, the defensive tackles, getting Trajan, Max, and another guy. What stands out about those guys and what they can kind of be with your potentially losing some defensive tackles after the season?
Yeah, we're going to need our interior D linemen to step up, losing both of those guys next year. So, we all think all these guys can make a difference early on in the process, and we're going to need them to. And who knows what that's going to look like, once Jack, JT, Ty, and Tyleek move on, is that front going to look the same, or are we going to consider some other things? So we wanted to bring in some guys with different skill sets that, may not fit the exact prototype of the guys that we brought in the past, but they can give some different versatility based on some things we may look at front-wise to get into next year.
Great. Kevin Noon, the Buckeye Huddle.
Ryan, on Turbo Rogers, he's a little bit of a different body type than the type of backs that you guys have brought in previously. What did you see out of Rogers, and why did you move forward with him?
Yeah, Locke has known him for a while and has been recruiting him for a while, so he had was very familiar with him. We felt like, based on what we saw him do this year, he was lined up as a receiver a lot. He was a returner. So he kind of gives us a little bit of that hybrid where he can line up at receiver, he can come into the backfield, he can return kicks. Haven't had a ton of those guys. Xavier Johnson was probably, the guy that was probably the best comp that way. And so whenever you can get guys like that, it's important. I think when you look at the way things are going in NIL with roster limitations, I think the more hybrid guys that you can bring in that can do multiple things will be important, especially this time of year when you're looking to make a run late in the season. You may take injuries. There's obviously the portal thing that we're working through right now. So guys who can do multiple job descriptions, I think their value is going to continue to increase, and I think Turbo is one of those guys.
And one more, the receiver position, obviously recruiting under Brian Hartline has been very strong at the position. What are your thoughts of the receivers you guys just signed?
Yeah, excited about them. I think Quincy really is a bigger receiver that is a different style than we've probably had. Obviously Jeremiah is big, but Quincy really, we loved his film going into last year. We felt like the game that he had against Chaminade, against Jeremiah's team the year before, was the one that really separated him for us. He really competed well, played well, and then you saw the season he had for Bergen Catholic this year. And Vito Campanelli does a great job with that program. It's state championship program, and he's a big physical guy. And when you look at those guys, you look where Marvin was as a junior and senior in high school. Jeremiah's a little bit different, but those bigger guys, they grow into their bodies and just become stronger and faster. We think all that's going to happen with Quincy. Got a great work ethic, works really hard. Dez is the teammate with Deshaun at DePaul Catholic. We signed him early. We think, again, another versatile guy that can line up inside and line up outside, does a lot of great things. Phil Bell, has had a challenging fall, has been through some different things, but is very mature. Our comp for him is probably a Mecca, just with his physicality and the way he plays, and he could line up inside or outside as well. So again, versatility with him. And then Bodpin is kind of the wild card. He's a local guy who came to camp, did some great things, ran some really good times, and then you watch him run some routes, which he hadn't done a whole lot of in his high school career, and you see some really high-end things that he was doing, especially with his size at 6'4". And then you watch some of the games he had this season, very, very competitive, plays quarterback. So I don't know if that'll be a year one for him, but we think that he can be a very, very good receiver. So some different, styles of guys in there. But, you got to have 10 or 11 guys on the roster, and you want to be able to develop some guys. So we have some guys that'll probably be a little bit further along when they first walk in, and then some other guys that we're going to develop.
Cameron T. Robinson, The Athletic.
Ryan, you talked about Tavian, but and I know you obviously want to recruit Ohio, but is it a different feel when your five-star quarterback, you're with the future of this program, is from your home state, only 45 an hour from down the road?
I think so. Yeah, it's the first time since I've been here that this has been the case, and it has certainly allowed him an opportunity to be around this more, to get a feel for it more, and to be more prepared when he walks in the door, because I think he was here for every spring practice. He was here for almost every game, and he'll walk through the door more prepared than if he was across the country.
Dave Holmes, WSYX.
Yeah, I know last year Jeremiah went to the last second, and you kind of referenced it at the beginning about the stress level the last day or two. Can you take us behind the curtain a little bit on NIL? And I mean, our kids saying, well, Miami says this, Bama can do this. I mean, what's the stress level nowadays in the last 24 hours to hang on to these guys?
It's a little bit of both. There's some that you have question marks going into the last few hours just because of that. Others, you feel good about here's what it is, and you go from there. It's very different. You don't just there's not unlimited funds and opportunities for everybody. So I think everybody's managing it in different areas. I think there's different spots for everybody, and we I think put together a great class for where we are. And but yeah, I think the numbers have gone up significantly, and every time you get to a portal or a signing day, you just see the water rising higher. And so it's just part of the game, and we got to adjust.
Andrew Gillis, Cleveland.com.
Ryan, specifically with Bodpin and Deshaun, I guess, too, but when you're evaluating players who are going to play a different position in college, what are the things that you look for? Like with Bodpin and with Deshaun, I know Deshaun's going to play safety here, but like what specific traits do you look for? What things do you look for on film that you can see that are transferable to when he gets there?
Yeah, it's you start with the film, and you look at the size, and you look at the play speed, and then you try to get a live evaluation, which we're able to do with both of those guys, to see what it looks like in person. You want to get an idea for both of those positions on ball skills, how they track the ball, tackling obviously for safety, for wide receiver, change direction, body control. So you just use as many of those things as you can, and then you look at them play the game. Because everything else is fine, but you got to see them play the game of football. And you watch Deshaun, run and hit and see the ball and make plays on the ball, and you watch Bodkin compete, and he's playing quarterback, he's moving all over, he's a football player. And those are the things you look for, and then you obviously look to see how they compete in big games.
Pat Murphy, 24/7 Sports.
Right. You've talked in the past about leaders in the class. I think obviously Tavian is one of those, but who were those guys in this group, and how important were they to kind of keeping things together like you touched on?
Yeah, on offense, like I mentioned before, it was Tavian. I think Carter Lowe also was solid in this thing and brought a bunch of guys together. He was strong. On the defensive side, Devin and both his parents were very much involved as well. They were excellent during the whole process. And a lot of these guys, as you can imagine, you had people coming at them from all over the place. But just the overall loyalty there was great. Fahim was in the middle of that. We had a great group of guys from the state of Ohio that stuck together during this whole process, because it just never ends. It just keeps coming at them, recruiters and all the way up until last week. So I'd say those, Cody and his family were great. Eli Lee's family was great. Riley Pettijohn and his mom and dad were great, because a lot of it has to do with the parents too, because they meet each other on the recruiting trips and they build relationships, and so I think they did a great job of sticking together.
You mentioned Carter. I think a lot of people look, an Ohio lineman, he should come to Ohio State.
Yep.
What do you guys like about him? I know there's other guys that were out there that you were interested in as well, but he's a guy who seems like maybe he could surprise some people, even though he's a highly ranked Ohio.
Well, first off, he can play, a couple different positions. He's got good size. He played basketball. He's got good feet. Very competitive, and wants to be at Ohio State, and knows what it means to be a Buckeye. All those things add up. Tough, physical. But again, I think he could play, a couple different positions. He could play tackle if we need him to. He could play guard. He's got the size to do that. He's got the feet to do it. So, we'll kind of see when he gets here. But, we're hoping that he can make a difference early on.
Let's go to Dave Biddle, 24/7 Sports.
We can open up for anything now? Okay. Ryan, against Michigan, I understand you guys wanted to establish the run. I mean, the stat, the team that's won the rushing battle the last 20 years wins the game. When that wasn't working, though, there seemed to be a lack of adjustments. Is that fair? And what did you see when you watched the film?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just overall, let me just quickly start with the defense. I feel like the defense played excellent. I thought that, really from the Oregon game on, some of those adjustments that were made have been excellent, and I thought they played really, really hard in this game. Was everything perfect? No, but I thought they played really good. I think when you look at the offensive side of the ball, it was not a good day. It wasn't a good day across the board on offense. And, some of that had to do with the coaching and some of the game planning that went on. There's no question that, we could have done a better job getting the ball to the perimeter. I think one of the key points of the game, though, is when you have 5 trips to the red zone and you only get 10 points. And, in those moments there, we had a couple missed field goals, we had an interception, we had the field goal, and we had the touchdown. And, we hadn't done that up to that point, and that was a big deal. So, and then on special teams, we had some other things that, we didn't execute very well. A couple, kicks that weren't fielded great down on the 7-yard line, which created coming out situations, and then we had the 2 missed field goals. So ultimately, that comes back on me as the head coach, whether it's, the right guys being in the right spot, the recruiting part of it, the scheme, the coaching. So, that's on me. But I think when you look back on it, there's definitely ways that we could have got the ball to the perimeter. I think when you look at, I think we threw it 35 times in the game, which is, I think, Will's second most throws. But, it certainly played into it being in the red zone and coming out. But there was definitely ways that we could have done a better job because it's the coach's job to put the guys in the best position to be successful. And that didn't always happen on Saturday.
And real quick, rallying the troops now. You did it 2 years ago. I know you guys fell short against Georgia, but you really outplayed them for most of that game. How do you rally the troops this year?
Well, we got a lot in front of us, and as much as this hurts, we got a chance to go play for a national championship. And when the dust settles, here we are, and we don't just turn around after a day and say, we're on to the next thing. That's not going to happen. But we've come in here, had some meetings. We're going to get out in the field today, move around a little bit, and so it's almost like the NFL. You think about the teams who are in the wild card, get that first win, and they can get some momentum going and win the whole thing. So that's all out in front of us, and we have plenty good enough players to go do that. So it's going to come down to the leaders pulling everybody together, knowing that we got some guys maybe going into the portal. We got a couple of things, but all those things are going to happen whether we lost or we won. So here we are, 10-2, frustrated with how the season ended, but everything's out in front of us. And so, we've had good conversations. I think the guys are moving in that direction. I know we want to know what the next target is, and we'll get that Sunday. But it's a good chance we're going to be hosting here, and so I think that's exciting for our guys. And I know that we'll rally around this thing and go after it.
Jeremy Birmingham, podcast.
Ryan, last one about recruiting before we get going in here.
It's a bonus.
You talk about adjusting to the changing NIL landscape, the money getting bigger and bigger every single time there's a conversation. How are you guys specifically adapting, but also how does the executive order that Mike DeWine signed in Ohio allowing the school to be more engaged and directly paying players assist you guys in this kind of wild, wild west, which is crazy that it's still a wild, wild west after 3 years of this?
Right. First off, for Governor DeWine to sign that is big for our university, big for the program, because it allows us more flexibility in how we do things. Won't get into the details of all that, but really, really important. And him doing that, again, allows us to do a lot more things. And I know we're all looking to try to figure out the revenue share and how that fits into the university. And so there's still a lot of questions to be answered on that. And so a lot of it is you're figuring out as you go. But we know that number continues to rise, so we have to continue to be aggressive in that area. And, what was the number last year is going to only increase next year. So the more things like that just happen that can be done certainly gives us, again, a better opportunity.
Has to be engaged and involved in national conversations to put a cap or a guideline or a limit on this.
Yeah, it's going to be at the conference level right now. And I give Tony a bunch of credit for being aggressive with this and communicating with Commissioner Sankey. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about, these types of things to make sure that there's alignment between the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's really where it's going to start. And I know that they have been in a lot of, talks about, multiple different ways to start addressing some of these things to put more guardrails around it.
Adam King, WBNS.
Getting back to the game, I know you're not going to give us the insight of exactly on the headset, but what is that discussion like between you and Chip there in the fourth quarter with every play call, debating if you should run, stick to the run, or if return to the pass?
Yeah, usually it's between each series. You get the script of what comes, for the next drive. Some thoughts that are going on, and some of them are mixed with RPOs, and some of them are just call it and run it. Mixture of all those things. But when you do call an RPO, sometimes if they're in a too high shell, that ball is going to get handed off, and then obviously you just have passes. And so you go through it, you go through the list and see what you're thinking, and there were a couple of them that, we got the turnover there in the red zone and weren't able to turn that. I mean, that was very, very frustrating, and that was a big part of the game right there. So, but that's typically how it goes.
When you look at kicking, where do you go from here? How confident are you in fielding, and how do you build that confidence knowing what's going forward?
Well, we wouldn't have put him in the game if we didn't feel confident in him. And, I know his teammates have told him the same thing. Everyone's got a job to do, and that's the game. And I have my job. Everyone has their own job. And so you got to do your job. And so, we'll continue to look at how he does in practice, but we wouldn't have put him in the game if we did not believe in him.
Spencer Holbrook, Letterman Row.
Ryan, in the 2 minute when you guys were taking timeouts and trying to get the ball back, as you reevaluate that situation, do you think that you guys handled that properly with your timeouts and using the 2 minute warning to your advantage, or is that something that you guys have to go back through and reevaluate?
Well, I think if you wait to the 2 minute warning, with 3 timeouts left and you still need a touchdown, that's plenty enough time to go down the field. And so, we try to do the best we can to get with, what's on the chart in terms of the analytics to get the feedback on what that should be. I think we had plenty of time to go score. We didn't do that. That wasn't the issue. But we'll always look at it to see where we are on the field, what's the down and distance, and then go from there. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is, get the ball back with as many timeouts as possible and as much time on the clock as possible.
And then the 12 minute, I know that you guys said that it was just a communication, but have there been conversations about that in particular and what exactly went wrong there out of the timeout?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into all of it, but yeah, there was a miscommunication from up top, and once it got sent in, it was hard to it got loud and it got hard to get back off the field, and so it was a miscommunication. It shouldn't have happened.
Stefan Kreisnick, Cleveland.com.
You look at the rankings yesterday and kind of how the bracket sets up, and like you said, it seems like you guys are going to get a home game after the way, not just the loss, but the post-game situation, everything. Is there a sense with the seniors of excitement to get another chance to kind of, I guess, avenge the way things ended at home last week?
I think there's a mix of emotions there, but I do think as we get closer to finding out who we're playing, there'll be more and more excitement around that. But I think to know that their season isn't over and that the last time they played with each other isn't over and that they still can achieve the goal of winning a national championship certainly is right there. And they are. I think with every day they're getting more and more excited about that. But again, you don't just wake up and say, okay, on to the next thing. It just doesn't work that way. But we're getting there, and that's why we're getting on the field today to get moving around and make sure everybody's together on this thing. And then that you got to get that first win. In the playoffs, you got to get that first one, and then you just continue to build from there and grow. But I know the seniors are going to do a good job leading here the next couple of weeks.
Dylan Davis, Delaware Gazette.
Going back to the game plan. So going into it, the game plan, you thought that even with a makeshift offensive line that you would be able to attack them in the middle, even though it's the strength of their defense. Are you saying that with the game plan going in that you felt comfortable with that?
No. I mean, I think that there was definitely times where we did that, and that didn't turn out very well. But there's also other times we tried some other things as well. And I do think being in the red zone, coming out, certainly played into that. And some of those were part of RPOs. But there's no question that, the ball was run interiorly too much in the game. I think that's clear to see. Again, we did throw it, I think, 35 times. And, there were some plays to the outside. But, yeah, overall, just the percentage was too high of running the ball inside. It's clear.
Did you find yourself involved in the play calling more so than you had at any point previous this year? Did you ever get involved in that at all? Or?
I try to give my feedback and try to get involved the much I can on both sides. I click over on defense, I click over on offense, and try to do everything I can to help, to be a part of it. But ultimately, listen, I'm responsible. I'm the head coach, so that's where the buck stops.
Rob Aller, Columbus Dispatch.
And there's some speculation that after the first pick and then after he went to the 10th, that you guys weren't comfortable maybe throwing the ball as much. Is there anything to that you thought, well, we need to run a little more here because Will took that shot, or is that just not accurate at all?
We go off of what the doctors say, and the doctors, felt like he was okay to go back into the game. And so in that moment, we have to trust that he is okay to do that. And I think a little bit too was the interception coming out a little bit, and I think you then are in a similar situation down there on the 5-yard line on 3rd and long. We didn't execute the run, but defense is playing good. Add to the punt, get it out of there, see if the defense can get a stop. But no, at the end of the day, we're going to just listen to the doctors and got to go off their advice.
So it didn't really impact from a coaching standpoint of how what it's going to look like, the play calling. He was fine as far as you're concerned.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then tempo, it really worked at the end of the half, and then it just kind of went away. Obviously, if you have to do it over again, maybe you go tempo. Why didn't you go back to it? What was the thinking of going to it?
Yep. We had tempo plays going into the game. I thought early on, we kind of had a little bit of a pace to us, got into the red zone again and bogged down. At the end of the half, we were in a 2-minute drill because it was more of a 2-minute situation than it was just tempo. Looking back again, I don't think there's any way you could argue that tempo would have helped us more in the game.
Bill Landis, Kings of the North.
Talk about having to win the rushing battle in this game and historically what that's meant. Does it at any point become, a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy? Like, that's what Michigan built its team to do. Meanwhile, you guys are as talented and more talented than anyone in the country at the receiver position, yet it seems like you go into this game with the mindset of we're going to run the ball anyway. I don't know if that's to prove a point or what, but how much is that on your mind, and at this point is it on your mind to your detriment as you try to put together a good game plan against Michigan?
Well, I think there's two things there. I think we certainly threw the ball more than we passed it. Threw the ball more than we ran it, but I don't think that's your question. I think the question is, what we got to do what's best to win the game. Yeah. And that's got to be the number one goal. I think there's certain things that you have to do, and we have a list of like 10 situations. The rushing yards is one of them, turnovers is one of them, X plays is one of them. You go through it. So you don't just get stuck on one thing. But when you see something that's like undefeated over 17 years, you got to make sure the guys understand that. That's important. But it doesn't necessarily mean like you got to do whatever you can to win the game. That's the bottom line. And so, there's other ways to run the ball. You can get the ball in the perimeter. You can, do different things, as you guys know. So, sometimes when you get down in there inside the red zone, it gets tight in there. You have to, be creative. And I think we could have been more creative in those areas.
You guys now are on year 4 of at least not reaching 2 of those stated goals. Obviously, the third one is still out in front of you. Why are you the right coach to get the team to that point this season?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I can't sit here and tell you that, as I look back on the 4 years, if there's like one thing in common, you look at each game and you can identify different things that didn't go well. And ultimately the result's the result, And so our guys, first off, love Ohio State. They are completely bought in. I thought they played extremely hard in that game, and I thought they wanted to win that game more than anything else. And so I think the culture is strong as it's ever been. I think we have great players. I think we have great coaches. It was a bad day. And so now we have to go forward. And we got to, and the mindset is go win the whole thing now. And that's it. Like, we can't go back and start, second guessing things at this point. Certainly you can imagine how that's happened here in the last, few days. But we have to move forward. We have to focus on that. And, again, when you look at our type of guys, you look at the program, you look at, the way our guys compete, you look at, the way our guys develop, you look at, we won a lot of games. We're 10-2. Now, I know we didn't win this one in some key games, and that hurts. So we got to keep learning from it and growing from it and building on it. Every time you go through some of this, you learn more and more, and, that has to be the case here.
Far left, Tony Girdman, Buckeye Huddle.
Ryan, with the game, how do you go about not minimizing it with the playoffs, but there's this thing of the game, then there's also the season that's still going on. Is there too much put on the game? Is there not enough? Is there not enough on the rest of the season? Like, where's your mindset in all of that?
I mean, I think about all of that a lot, yeah. Because we all know what this game means, and again, when you come up short in the game, it's devastating. But we still got a great opportunity in front of us. So I think we've had some good meetings. We've talked about it. We've kind of come to some common ground in certain areas, and so again, we're getting back on the field today, getting moving forward, and you got to look at it, like the NFL playoffs, and that's what we're going to do. So. As bad as this feels, we have an opportunity to go here and go win a championship in 4 games. So, we can use that frustration and anger and things that have come with this loss to catapult us into these playoffs, to motivate us. And that's what we have to do, because at this point, you only can control what you can control. So that's kind of where our focus will be.
And then I guess you just had wrapped up signing day. Do you expect to be here next year?
Yes.
Steve Helwagen, 24/7 Sports.
Yeah, Coach, along the lines of Bill's question, I mean, 4 straight years, the result, I mean, the games have looked different, but the result's been the same. Just, you're still in the middle of this season. I understand that completely, but as you get into the offseason and think about your approach and how you're going to go about your business, at some point, is there going to be an emphasis on, is this as simple as spending more money on the offensive line, finding the guys that you need to win in the Big Ten in November? Just what kind of things will you address, I guess, in the offseason, so that, as you said before the game, this never happens again?
Well, I felt like, we did some of that this offseason, when we, upgraded in some certain areas, and, and some of that was in the offensive line. But there's no question that, we have to win in there. In that game and in a lot of games. So, yeah, I mean, there's no question at the end of the season, you go through and you try to identify the areas that you got to get upgraded, you got to get fixed to go reach your goals. And so that'll get done again this year.
Dan Holt, Lebanon Warriors.
Ryan, just going back to, the goal stuff and the seniors, I mean, this is a senior class. You brought them in 2021. It was the highest rated class in history. They haven't achieved any of those 3 goals yet. Does that, make you feel a sense of pressure that you got to go accomplish something in this college ball playoffs so that this class leaves here or something?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's it. And then these guys, again, we've said it all year. They came back for a reason. So yeah, when you lose this game, it is completely maddening and just frustrating and all the above. And so yeah, again, the good news is we still have a goal out in front of us. We still got a chance to go do something special here with this group. But the adjustments have to be made. In order to do that, we got to get the things fixed that didn't go well in that game, and got to get that first win and then get some momentum from there, because that's all we can do at this point. But yeah, to sit here and say that we're not frustrated or disappointed, it would not be true.
It seems like you guys were playing with a ton of confidence, very freely against Indiana, and that just didn't carry over to Michigan. Why don't you think it carried over, and how do you get that back?
I think we came into the game as confident and as loose, I think, as we've been since I've been here, probably going back to 19. So, I think as the game went on, it started to get a little bit tighter, because, it was a couple turnovers here and there, some things didn't go our way. And so, you start to feel that a little bit as the game went on. I don't think we started out the game that way. I don't. And I thought that preparation was loose coming into the game. But obviously it didn't end that way.
I guess then what do you have to do then so that if you get into playoffs, you end up in a similar situation where things start poorly?
Yeah.
How do you keep the team from losing its confidence like it did in that game?
Yeah, well, you got to continue to find ways to jumpstart the team and get some excitement, and execution fuels emotion, and you know, a big part of that is coaching, you know, trying to find ways to, you know, jumpstart the team and give them some, you know, X plays or things on the perimeter that can kind of get us going a little bit. And then when you start, you know, moving things around and getting the ball outside, it opens up a little bit inside. Now, when all of a sudden we can't just abandon the run. We're just not going to be throwing it, you know, 60 times a game. That's just not a, you know, a recipe for success. But it's clear that we have, you know, very, very good receivers here, and when we have an advantage there, we got to utilize that. And so we have to figure out what those adjustments are going into this next game and make sure that gets done.
Stephen Means, Cleveland.com.
Can you overthink the Michigan game? And do you feel like you guys have started to overthink the Michigan game as this losing streak has continued?
I think, you know, you can look at it a million different ways, which you can imagine we have too. But at the end of the day, you got to put your players in a situation to be successful, and then we got to execute them. You know, we do. We have to take care of the ball, but we also have to be aggressive. And you know, it comes down to both of those things. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We can't sit there and crawl up into a shell, but at the same time, we can't be reckless with the ball either. And you know, that's what it comes down to. And I think when you have success early on, it can build some, you know, positive momentum. And you know, when you don't, then, you know, things can get a little bit uptight, and that's kind of what happened. But execution fuels emotion, and again, it goes back to, you know, the coach has got to put us in a situation to be successful, and then the guys got to go execute it and do it.
And there's maybe this idea out there that there's the idea of like maybe you not being here because it's somebody else's decision, but also that idea of you not being here because of your own decision. Have you at any point in the last couple of years even come close to having that thought?
No, this is a wonderful place, and I got a great job, one of the best jobs in America, and it's a challenge at times. And you know, I'm disappointed about this more than anybody. It crushes me, but you know, we're going to continue to move and figure out what it is and overcome this obstacle. And we got a great way to make this a little bit better by going to win the whole thing this year. And then we figure out what it is and get it fixed moving forward. That's it. And it's my job to make sure I'm focused on this team right now. And obviously, you know, with recruiting, to make sure the pieces are ready moving forward. That's it.
Justin Frye's been here 3 years now. I think he's landed 10 guys on the recruiting trail, plus a couple other transfer portal additions. Do you think he has done a good job recruiting and developing his position group?
No, I think you know, for all of our guys, there's been things that they've done well, and then things that they haven't done well. You know, and so we give them feedback on, you know, the areas that they got to improve on. You know, I've shared with him some of my things that I think he's doing well and things he's not doing well, and I won't get into those right now. But there's all areas that we can improve in, and you know, the number one job for any position coach is their unit, their room. You know, who you're bringing in, who you're developing, and ultimately, you know, are you building enough depth to go win the games we need to win? And so, you know, that's the challenge for all of our guys. Then it's power of the unit, and then it's scheme is really the third thing. So, you know, there's certainly things he's done well, but things he's got to improve on.
Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch.
Ryan, in the last few days since Sunday, people have talked about your future on social media, television. What have been the communications you've had with recruits, the guys who signed today, guys in the roster? What has that message to them all been like?
No, they've been great. You can tell by the class there was nobody flinching, and I think, you know, a lot of these guys nowadays have found some balance, you know, and not riding the roller coaster, and understand what comes with being at Ohio State, and not, you know, diving into the extremes of it all. And so, you know, it's a great sign to see these guys that didn't even flinch after this game. I think it motivated them even more to want to come here and win next year.
Has it not been a big? Have you had to like reassure them, like, hey, I'll be the one coaching you next year, or anything like that?
No, it never came up.
Tom Berry, WBNS.
Coach Ugly, seeing at the end of the game, would you be in favor of the NCAA or the Big Ten banning flag planting?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a touchy subject because of the way the game ended. But you know, I think, you know, that's up for Tony and, you know, the guys at the Big Ten to decide and figure out what's best. We certainly you know, don't want situations like that going on after the game.
One other thing, with what we're kind of seeing, like the professionalism of college football recruiting, how much more time do you spend now on the transfer portal because the one phenomenon is it seems that teams are getting older now, taking guys, and it's almost like a free agency system, just to help with depth and everything. How much more do you go to it now?
I think every year is going to be more and more. I think, we'll kind of see how this year shakes out with the retention, but ultimately you got to fill your roster. And when you look at the value in the NFL of a rookie as opposed to somebody who's getting into their second contract, they're different. And I think that there is a value to bringing in a freshman as they get into your program. They're into your program. They're a Buckeye. So there's a premium on that. But the value of a freshman coming in and playing is not the same as a third or fourth year guy, someone who's in their 20s, who's more mature. So those are all things that Mark Pantoni really, and I have had conversations about, because you have to start kind of putting values on guys and figuring that out like the NFL. And so that's what we got to do. And so I think more and more the portal will become part of the conversation just because of the way this is set up, and the fact that it's opening up next week during this whole process is a whole nother set of challenges that we got to work through this year, but also moving forward just in terms of the rules of it all, because you're gonna see some teams really affected by this.
Allowed to have so many players, does that,
Yeah,
as far as the actual recruiting the younger kids, does that change everything?
it does. Yeah, it changes, and we don't know exactly what it's going to be in terms of a roster limit now. We've heard certain numbers that we're working towards and projecting on. So, that's the way we're making our decisions.
Austin Ward, the podcast.
Ron, you have always said ultimately you're responsible. You've never hidden from that part of it, and you've said that the last few days have been full of second guessing. When you were thinking about that, is there any part of you that has lost confidence or self-belief that you are the right guy for this job?
Yeah, no. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and if I was in your seat, I'd be asking the same question. But no, not at all. I go through every single thing that we do, and but there are things that you learn from, and just things that are absolutely maddening and frustrating. And I was in shock after the game. I really was. I never expected that to happen. And there were some things that happened in the game that I'm responsible for that can never happen again. I don't know how else to say it. And then other things that it's still a game of football. And certain things that are going to happen in the game affect the outcome. That's just how it goes. As much as we all want to win the game, we still got to play the game, and that's really what it comes down to. I know it sounds simple, but that's it. And again, we got great guys. We have great football minds. We have great talent. So again, nobody's more frustrated than me, but I know we're going to get this right.
Bill asked you about this earlier with just getting ready for the playoff and you leading them into that, leading the Buckeyes into that. For any segment of the fan base or anyone who thinks they're out on Ryan Day, I know culture, a day like today and the signing class are all wrapped up into this. What would be your sales pitch to them?
Yeah, I don't think I need to have a sales pitch, but I can say that, I feel their frustration. I don't know what else to tell you. There's no way to defend losing 4 years in a row, but I know this, we're going to play really hard in this game. We're going to swing as hard as we possibly can. And, we got a great group of guys. And so, this is going to move on to, this next challenge, and we got to go attack it with everything that we possibly have. And, and that's about it. I get the frustration. I know what comes with this job, but we also, we've won a lot of games around here too. We've lost some key ones, I know, but, we're right there and we got to keep swinging at it. We got to keep cracking it. And sometimes when, you're really, really close and you feel frustrated, you just got to push through, and that's what we're going to do.
Tim May, let him in a row.
Yeah, Ryan, following up on that, a lot of people now, not a lot of people, I've gotten a lot of calls, but you have to play so many roles right now. You understand what I'm saying? And a lot of people want to know, what is that fire? Can you describe the fire in your belly that makes you worthy of being the Ohio State head coach? I'm not questioning, I'm just
Sure.
asking, because a lot of people, because you're so cordial to us, despite repeated questions about different things and stuff, but can you describe the fire in your belly that could erupt the next 4 weeks?
Well, I think it starts with our guys, and when you talk about the motivation of anybody, it starts with the players, and that motivates all of our staff. I know it motivates me every single day to come in here and do everything we possibly can so those guys can achieve their goals. That's why you wake up in the morning, You talk about fire, like that's it. I think the next thing is for, you know, the fan base and for Buckeye Nation who cares so much about Ohio State. So, you know, when you don't succeed, boy, it just completely crushes you, you know? And so, and then there's just the competitiveness as a person to want to go win. And all of those things motivate us and motivate me. And so, you know, that's what gets you up in the morning and drives you every day, you know? And, again, you know, it's hard to say right now coming off of this loss, but, you know, you talk about, you know, these guys and how hard they go and you know, how hard we go 365 days out of the year. I mean, there's nobody that goes harder than we do and puts in the work we do. So, again, you know, I don't have an answer in terms of, you know, exactly, you know, why, other than there needs to be better decisions made in terms of how we game plan and needs to be better execution in certain areas.
And has nothing to do with that. It has a recruiting question. Can I ask that?
Sure.
Tavian St. Clair committed, seems like almost 5 years ago, but he committed early. Y'all have got a commitment now. I know you can't talk about that. Who's going into, I think, his junior year. What tells you in a sophomore season of a player that he's the quarterback of the future for Ohio State? You understand what I'm saying? What are the telltale signs?
Well, you look at the ability first, and then you look at the competitiveness, the leadership, the size. I mean, you look at a lot of different things, and you try to do the best you can based on, you know, your experience and what you've seen. Knowing that sometimes when they're young, it's a little bit of a risk. And so everybody's a little bit different. You've seen us take guys late. You've seen us take guys early in the process, and you try to make each decision based on what you see.
Yeah, and it's about being in there early. I mean, is that part of the game? Being in there early on a guy? I mean, is that...
Some guys are recruited early, and some guys are recruited late, and it just depends on who that is. It doesn't necessarily mean the guys who are recruited early end up becoming the best players. Some guys like C.J. Stroud get recruited late, and they become really good players. Everybody's unique. So you got to make sure you look at it that way. There's no cookie cutter way, or you know, we use comps, but that's not necessarily fair either. You know, everybody's their own person. So you got to try to do and treat everybody individually, you know, as they are.
Thanks, man.
And final questions, Bill Rabinowitz, Columbus Dispatch.
I'll start with the offensive line. How confident are you that this line, the way it's constituted, is capable of winning a national championship? Are you contemplating changes on the line?
Yeah, we're definitely going to contemplate some rolling at the very least. Look at it over the next couple of weeks. Probably could have done that in the game and considered that in the game. It was a big game. Didn't think that was the right thing to do at the time, but looking back, probably, you know, should have at least tried something. And so, yeah, we will look into this week on doing some of that.
Josh, do you have a possibility at center, for example, or do you get to maybe shift guys around, or new starters, or what?
Yeah, all of the above. You know, Josh and Luke, and you know, even considered moving Donovan back inside. We've done a bunch of different things in terms of communication, or in terms of talking in the meeting room. We're not there yet, making a decision. You know, we do have a couple weeks here to take a look at those things and see what gives us the best chance, and maybe it's multiple guys.
Ross came out Sunday and gave you full support. What do you feel is the level of support from the administration, from donors, for you staying as coach?
Well, again, I think everybody's frustrated, and we know it's not acceptable. So I get that part of it, but I think everybody knows that we have to go and attack this thing moving forward. That's what it's going to be. We got an opportunity to go win a national championship, and everybody around here has been very supportive on that, focusing on that, and that's really what it is. And I know what the job is. I know where the focus needs to be, and there hasn't been a ton of communication other than that.
Everyone is saying, and it's probably true, this was the hardest of the 4 losses because Michigan had struggled this year and everything else. Has it felt like that to you? Is this the hardest loss that you've endured here, and how have you gotten through it?
I try not to rank them, but yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. There's no two ways around it. Yeah.
Coach, thank you very much.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.